Sometimes, the greatest lie isn't the one you're told. It's the one you spend years believing. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. Men twice my age lowered their voices when I entered a room. Politicians smiled for my cameras and denied knowing me the moment they faced reporters. In New York, my name carried the kind of weight people pretended not to notice. Adrian Moretti. CEO to the public. Philanthropist to the newspapers. A man whose wealth built hospitals, funded scholarships, and restored churches. But beneath the polished headlines, everyone understood one simple truth. If Adrian Moretti wanted something, he got it. There was only one thing money, influence, and power had never returned to me. 6 years ago, I buried the dream of becoming a father. At least, that's what I believed. The charity gala was supposed to last 2 hours. Another carefully orchestrated evening filled with crystal chandeliers, tailored tuxedos, expensive laughter, and conversations worth millions of dollars. My security team stayed several steps behind while donors approached one after another, eager for a handshake, a photograph, or a promise of another generous contribution. I delivered the same controlled smile I had perfected years ago. Calm. Respectful. Untouchable. Inside, I counted every minute until I could leave. Children's charities had become my routine ever since my divorce. Some people believed it was guilt. Others called it good publicity. Neither explanation mattered. The truth belonged to me alone. A violin quartet filled the ballroom with soft music while waiters floated through the crowd carrying silver trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. Parents chatted proudly beside colorful displays painted by elementary school students whose artwork would soon be auctioned for donations. I stopped in front of one canvas showing a little lighthouse beside an endless blue ocean. The handwriting at the bottom read, "Home is where someone waits for you." For reasons I couldn't explain, my chest tightened. Before I could step away, I heard tiny footsteps racing across the marble floor. Fast. Carefree. Determined. Security reacted instantly. I noticed them shift before I even turned around. But then a small voice cut through the elegant noise of the ballroom with the kind of innocence that made everything else disappear. Papa. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed inside me like an echo I had forgotten existed. A little boy, no older than 6, wrapped both arms around my leg as if he'd known me forever. His sandy blonde hair was slightly messy, his little navy blazer crooked from running, and his bright blue eyes looked up at me with complete certainty. "I found you," he said, smiling like this was the happiest day of his life. Every conversation around us seemed to fade. Even the musicians missed a note. My body refused to move. I stared down at the child while my mind searched desperately for an explanation that refused to come. I had never seen him before. At least, I didn't think I had. Then I looked across the ballroom. A woman stood frozen near the entrance, her face drained of color. Claire Bennett. My ex-wife. The woman I hadn't spoken to in 6 years. The woman I believed had chosen to erase our unborn child before walking out of my life forever. She looked exactly as I remembered, only quieter somehow, carrying exhaustion behind her eyes that expensive clothes could never hide. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for one endless moment neither of us breathed. Then the little boy squeezed my hand, looked up with complete trust, and smiled again. "Mama said I'd know you the second I saw you, Papa." I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the applause filling the ballroom. The little boy still held my hand with absolute confidence, as though there had never been a world where I did not belong beside him. His fingers were small and warm, and somehow that simple touch unraveled years of carefully built walls inside me. Claire finally moved. She crossed the polished floor with hurried steps, her expression caught somewhere between panic and heartbreak. When she reached us, she knelt beside the boy and gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. "Ethan," she whispered softly, trying to smile. "Honey, why do not you come with me?" He frowned in confusion and tightened his grip around my hand instead. "But Mama, this is him." My throat felt dry. Claire. Her eyes met mine for only a second before dropping again. They were still the same soft grey eyes I remembered from another lifetime, except now they carried years of sleepless nights. I am sorry, she said quietly. He did not know you would be here. None of this made sense. 6 years ago she had walked out of my apartment carrying a single overnight bag and an envelope she left on the kitchen counter. Inside had been medical paperwork and one handwritten sentence that haunted every quiet night afterward. I cannot have this baby. Please do not come looking for me. I remembered standing there until sunrise, reading those words over and over again, hoping they would somehow change. They never did. When my attorney confirmed the divorce paperwork weeks later, I stopped asking questions. If she wanted a life without me, I forced myself to believe that was her choice. It became easier to bury the future we had planned than to wonder why it disappeared. Yet the little boy standing beside me looked no older than 6. His birthday could not be more than a few months away from the child we had once dreamed about together. My eyes drifted toward him again. He had Claire's smile, but something else stopped me cold. His eyes. Bright blue. Almost identical to mine. Coincidences existed. I had built an empire by refusing to believe in coincidences. Ethan tilted his head. Did I do something wrong? The question shattered whatever distance remained between us. Before Claire could answer, I found myself kneeling so we were eye level. No, I said gently. You did nothing wrong. He studied my face with the fearless curiosity only children possess. You look sad. I almost laughed at the honesty of it. Adults spent years hiding behind polished words while children walked straight to the truth. Maybe I am, I admitted. Sometimes grown-ups get confused. Ethan nodded thoughtfully as though that explained everything. Mama says confused people just need the truth. Claire closed her eyes for the briefest moment, and I realized those simple words had been meant for me as much as for him. Around us, the gala slowly resumed its rhythm. Conversations returned in cautious whispers. The musicians began playing again. My security detail remained frozen several yards away, waiting for instructions I could not give. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this moment. Not the boardrooms. Not the negotiations. Not the years spent earning respect through discipline and control. Because no amount of power could answer the one question now echoing through every corner of my mind. If the papers had been a lie, then who had stolen 6 years from all of us? I should have asked 1,000 questions right there in the ballroom, but years of discipline kept every one of them locked behind my teeth. Instead, I stood slowly and looked at Claire with the same controlled expression that had intimidated executives, competitors, and reporters for more than a decade. She knew that look better than anyone. Once, it had meant I was preparing for another impossible negotiation. Tonight, it meant I was trying not to let my world collapse in front of hundreds of strangers. Can we talk? I asked quietly. Claire hesitated before answering. Not here. Ethan looked from her to me, sensing the tension even if he could not understand it. He slipped his small hand into hers but kept watching me with curious blue eyes. Are you coming with us? He asked hopefully. My chest tightened again. Nobody had looked at me with that kind of trust in years. I would like to, I answered honestly. Claire swallowed before gently shaking her head. Not tonight. She turned toward the exit, but Ethan suddenly reached into the pocket of his tiny blazer. Wait. He pulled out a folded piece of paper covered in colorful crayon marks. I made this. Before Claire could stop him, he placed it carefully into my hand. It is our family picture. I unfolded the paper slowly. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One little figure held the hand of a smiling woman. On the other side stood a tall man wearing what looked like a black suit with a blue tie. Above them, written in uneven block letters, were 3 words. Mama. Me. Papa. I stared at the drawing far longer than I should have. He draws that man in every picture, Claire admitted softly without looking at me. Even though he has never met him before today. Ethan smiled proudly. Mama says my dad is brave. Claire closed her eyes as though she wished she could pull those words back. I looked up at her. You told him about me. She nodded once. I never told him your name. I only told him that his father loved him before he was even born. The sentence landed harder than anything I had heard all evening. Loved him before he was even born. If she believed that, then why had she disappeared? Why had she left those papers? Why had she allowed me to spend 6 birthdays believing my child had never taken a first breath? Ethan tugged gently on Claire's sleeve. Mama, can Papa come to my school play next month? She froze completely. I noticed the tears gathering in her eyes before she turned away so Ethan would not see them. We should go, she whispered. They began walking toward the ballroom doors while I remained rooted beside the children's artwork, still holding the drawing in my hands. Every instinct I had built over years told me to order my security team to find answers before sunrise. It would have been easy. My resources could locate anyone in the city within hours. But this was not a business problem, and Claire was not an enemy. She was the woman I had once promised forever. If there was a truth buried beneath 6 years of silence, I wanted to hear it from her, not from a report lying on my desk. As the revolving doors slowly turned, Ethan looked back one last time. He lifted his little hand and waved with the biggest smile I had seen in years. Bye, Papa. See you soon. For the first time since Claire walked out of my life, I realized something impossible. I did not need proof that the little boy existed. I needed to discover who had convinced me he never would. I did not go home that night. Instead, I stood alone inside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office overlooking Manhattan while the city glittered beneath the darkness like a million unanswered questions. Ethan's drawing rested on my desk beside contracts worth more money than most people would earn. In a lifetime. Somehow, the crayon picture carried far more weight than any document I had signed that week. I traced the uneven letters with my fingertips. Mama. Me. Papa. Children did not invent stories like that on their own. Someone had given him hope. Someone had protected that hope for 6 long years. I pressed the intercom. Daniel. My chief of security appeared less than a minute later, dressed as sharply as always, though I noticed the concern in his expression the moment he saw my face. He had worked beside me for nearly 10 years and knew when silence meant something was deeply wrong. So, I slid the folded drawing across the desk. I need information, but listen carefully. He nodded without speaking. No surveillance. No intimidation. No pressure. Claire Bennett is not to feel threatened in any way. I only want the truth. Daniel looked surprised. Understood. Find out where she has lived for the last 6 years. Where Ethan was born. Which schools he attended. Every legal document connected to them. Quietly. He hesitated before asking, should I also reopen the hospital records from the divorce? My eyes lifted slowly. Yes. 20 minutes after he left, I found myself opening a locked drawer I had not touched in years. Inside sat a worn manila envelope with my handwriting across the front. Claire. I had almost thrown it away dozens of times but never managed to do it. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. Hospital forms. Divorce documents. The handwritten note. I read every page again, forcing myself to notice details I had ignored 6 years earlier. Something immediately felt different. The signature at the bottom of one medical page did not resemble Claire's handwriting. It looked rushed. Almost mechanical. I pulled another document from the envelope, an old birthday card she had written during our 2nd anniversary. The loops in her letters were elegant and rounded. The signature on the hospital form was stiff, uneven, almost like someone copying her name. My pulse quickened. Had I really accepted everything without questioning it? Or had I simply been too heartbroken to look closer? Before I could finish comparing the papers, my phone vibrated. Daniel. Sir, I have something. His voice carried an urgency I rarely heard. Claire never stayed in New York after the divorce. I stood immediately. Where did she go? Boston. She rented a small apartment under her maiden name less than 2 weeks after leaving the city. I walked toward the window, staring at the lights below. Continue. There is another detail. He paused. There are no medical records showing that she ever had the procedure described in those papers. The room became completely silent. Are you certain? I checked twice. My grip tightened around the phone. Anything else? Yes. Ethan was born exactly 7 months after Claire disappeared. The birth certificate lists only one parent. I closed my eyes. Every assumption I had carried for 6 years cracked a little more. Claire had not disappeared because she wanted to erase our child. She had disappeared while carrying him. That meant every lonely birthday, every empty Christmas, every night I convinced myself there had been nothing left to save had been built on a foundation that was beginning to crumble. I looked down once more at Ethan's drawing lying on my desk. For the first time in years, I was no longer searching for someone who had left me. I was searching for the truth that someone had worked very hard to hide. The next morning, I cancelled every meeting on my calendar. Board members could wait. Investors could wait. For the first time in years, business no longer felt like the most important thing in my life. By 9 o'clock, Daniel returned carrying a single leather folder instead of the thick reports he usually prepared. He placed it carefully on my desk. There is not much, sir, he admitted. Almost like someone wanted her life to disappear. I opened the folder. There were rental agreements from a quiet neighborhood outside Boston, employment records from a small community library, school enrollment forms for Ethan, and dozens of ordinary details that painted a picture completely different from the one I had imagined. Claire had never remarried. She had never lived in luxury. She worked modest jobs, volunteered at Ethan's elementary school, and spent nearly every weekend at the same public park according to neighborhood accounts. There were photographs taken during charity events and local newspaper articles. In every single one, she looked tired but peaceful. Ethan was always smiling beside her. Anything unusual? I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. One thing. He handed me a photocopy of an old hospital visitor log dated almost 7 years earlier. A familiar name appeared near the bottom. Vincent Moretti. My adoptive father. I stared at the page without speaking. Vincent had died 2 years ago, remembered publicly as a respected businessman and generous donor. Few people knew how carefully he controlled every aspect of the Moretti family. Even fewer understood that disappointing him had never been an option. Why would he visit the hospital? I asked quietly. Daniel folded his hands. The records show Claire checked into the maternity department for an examination that day. Vincent arrived less than 20 minutes later. My pulse quickened. Did they leave together? No. Claire left alone nearly an hour afterward. Vincent remained inside another 30 minutes before speaking privately with hospital administration. I felt an uncomfortable weight settle over me. Memories I had ignored for years suddenly returned with remarkable clarity. Vincent had insisted I attend an emergency business meeting that same afternoon. He had personally discouraged me from visiting Claire after she cancelled dinner unexpectedly. At the time, I had accepted every explanation without question because I trusted him completely. Daniel carefully slid one final document across the desk. You should see this. It was a copy of a cashier's check issued the following week. The recipient was Claire Bennett. The amount was enough to purchase a comfortable home outright. My stomach tightened. Was it ever deposited? Daniel shook his head. No. The bank records show it was never cashed. I leaned back slowly, trying to assemble pieces that refused to fit together. If Vincent had offered Claire money, and she refused it, then whatever happened between them had not been about greed. It had been about something else. Something important. Enough for her to disappear without taking a single dollar. My phone buzzed unexpectedly. An unknown number. I answered without thinking. There was silence for several seconds before I heard Claire's voice. It sounded softer than I remembered, almost uncertain. I know you have started looking for answers. I closed my office door. Yes. Another long pause followed. You deserve the truth, she whispered. But not over the telephone. My heart began beating faster. Then tell me where to meet you. She took a slow breath. Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. The little lighthouse park in Boston. Come alone. Before I could ask another question, the line disconnected. I looked down at Ethan's drawing still resting beside my phone. Tomorrow, after 6 years of silence, I would finally hear the story that had changed all three of our lives. The lighthouse park overlooked a quiet stretch of Boston Harbor where the morning fog drifted gently above the water. It was nothing like Manhattan. There were no flashing cameras, no endless traffic, no skyscrapers reaching into the clouds. Just a wooden pier, a handful of benches, and families enjoying an ordinary Saturday morning. I arrived 15 minutes early. Old habits were difficult to break. My security team stayed several blocks away exactly as I had instructed. This conversation belonged only to Claire and me. At exactly 10 o'clock, I saw Ethan first. He raced ahead carrying a small red kite almost as tall as he was, laughing as the ocean breeze tugged against it. Claire followed several steps behind with a backpack over one shoulder and a travel mug in her hand. She looked nervous, but she did not turn around or hesitate. She had chosen to come. Ethan spotted me immediately. His entire face lit up. "Papa," he shouted before running straight toward me. This time I did not freeze. I knelt instinctively and caught him as he wrapped both arms around my shoulders. He smelled like sunscreen, fresh air, and the sweet shampoo children always seem to use. "You came," he said happily. "I promised I would," I answered. The word surprised even me. Ethan stepped back and proudly held up the kite. "Can you help me fly it?" Claire watched us silently. For a brief moment she looked as though she was seeing a future she had tried very hard not to imagine. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "The wind is perfect today." Ethan grabbed my hand without asking permission and pulled me toward the open grass. I had negotiated mergers, managed international companies, and spoken before thousands of people, yet somehow I had absolutely no idea how to help a 6-year-old launch a kite. Ethan giggled when it landed upside down for the second time. "You have to let the wind do the work," he explained with complete confidence. "You cannot pull too hard." I laughed. A real laugh. The kind I had not heard from myself in years. Together we tried again. This time the kite lifted into the bright blue sky, climbing higher until Ethan cheered loud enough for nearby families to smile at us. He looked up with pure joy shining across his face. "See? We did it together." We stood there watching the kite dance above the harbor while the morning breeze carried away years of silence I had never believed could disappear. After several minutes Ethan wandered toward a nearby ice cream cart, happily counting the allowance money he had saved. Claire and I remained standing beneath the clear sky. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally she broke the silence. "He has asked about you since he was old enough to talk." I swallowed hard. "Why did you tell him I loved him?" She looked toward Ethan before answering. "Because it was true. You loved him long before either of us knew whether he would be a boy or a girl." I lowered my eyes. "Then why did you let me believe he was gone?" Tears gathered quietly in hers. "Because someone convinced me that if I stayed with you, Ethan would grow up surrounded by a life neither of us wanted for him. I thought leaving was the only way to protect both of you." I searched her face, realizing she had carried that burden alone every single day since she walked away. Before I could respond, Ethan came running back holding 3 melting ice cream cones instead of 1. He proudly handed one to Claire, one to me, then smiled between us. Families always share dessert, he announced as though it were the most obvious rule in the world. Neither Claire nor I corrected him. After Ethan wandered toward the playground with two boys he had just met, Claire and I sat on a weathered wooden bench facing the harbor. The laughter of children drifted across the park while gulls circled above the water. It felt strangely peaceful, almost unfairly peaceful, considering the conversation we were about to have. Claire wrapped both hands around her paper coffee cup even though it had already gone cold. The day I left New York, she began quietly, your father asked me to meet him at the hospital after my appointment. I remained silent. She deserved to tell the story without interruption. He was kind at first. Calm. He said he respected me and believed I truly loved you. She forced a faint smile that disappeared almost immediately. Then he told me something I could never forget. She looked down at the wooden boards beneath our feet. He said that every person close to the Moretti family eventually paid a price for that connection. He believed your future depended on keeping your personal life completely separate from your public one. My jaw tightened, but I did not speak. He told me that if I stayed, our child would spend every birthday surrounded by bodyguards, every school event looking over his shoulder, every ordinary moment becoming complicated because of your family's reputation. Then he placed an envelope on the table. I already knew what had been inside. The cashier's check. I never wanted the money, Claire whispered. I pushed it back across the table. She finally looked at me. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Then he said something that frightened me far more than the check. My heartbeat slowed. What? He said that if I truly loved you, I would let you hate me instead of watching you choose between your family and the life you had built. The words settled heavily between us. I remembered Vincent's constant speeches about sacrifice, loyalty, and legacy. At the time I believed they were lessons about leadership. Now they sounded like instructions for control. The hospital papers? I asked softly. Claire nodded. They were already prepared when I arrived. I refused to sign them at first. He told me they would protect everyone. He promised that once enough time had passed, you would move on and build the future he wanted for you. She laughed bitterly. He underestimated how stubborn both of us were. I closed my eyes for a moment. For 6 years I had blamed Claire for making an impossible decision. All along she had been carrying a burden that never should have belonged to her. Why did you never contact me after he passed away? I finally asked. She looked toward Ethan, who was proudly helping another child untangle a jump rope. Because after 6 years, I did not know if hearing from me would heal your heart or reopen every wound. I told myself that if destiny wanted you to know Ethan, it would happen naturally. I smiled sadly. A 6-year-old sold what 2 adults could not. She smiled too, the first genuine smile I had seen from her in years. At that exact moment Ethan came sprinting back toward us, slightly out of breath and holding a small participation ribbon from the playground games. Without hesitation he climbed onto the bench between us and wrapped one arm around each of our shoulders. Guess what? He said proudly. The lady giving out ribbons thought you were my mom and dad. Claire and I exchanged a long, quiet look. Neither of us corrected him. Neither of us wanted to. I returned to New York that evening, but I did not return to the same life. For years I had measured success by acquisitions, headlines, and the respect that followed my name. Now every achievement seemed strangely small compared to a 6-year-old boy asking if I would come to his school play. Monday morning, my executive team gathered inside the boardroom expecting another discussion about expansion. Instead, I announced that I would be stepping back from several responsibilities and appointing additional leadership to oversee daily operations. The room fell silent. Questions filled every face, but none of them mattered anymore. For the first time since inheriting the Moretti empire, I chose my family before my schedule. 2 days later I found myself driving back to Boston without a convoy. Without flashing security vehicles, and without the polished image I had spent years protecting. I wore jeans, a navy sweater, and carried a simple paper gift bag resting on the passenger seat. Inside was a children's telescope I had remembered Ethan admiring during our walk by the harbor. When I knocked on Claire's front door, she answered wearing a comfortable sweatshirt with flower on one sleeve. The smell of fresh chocolate chip cookies drifted through the house. She looked surprised, then smiled politely. "You drove all this way?" I nodded. I wanted to ask something in person. Before she could answer, Ethan came racing down the hallway. "Papa!" He threw his arms around me with the same unquestioning trust he always had. I hugged him tightly, realizing how quickly this small boy had become the center of thoughts that used to revolve entirely around work. "I brought you something." His eyes grew wide as he opened the gift bag. "A telescope," he shouted. "Now we can look at the stars together." We spent nearly an hour in the backyard assembling it while Claire watched from the porch with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Ethan insisted on showing me every flower he had planted, every drawing taped to the refrigerator, and every book he wanted us to read together someday. None of it was extraordinary, yet every ordinary moment felt priceless because I had missed so many of them already. As the afternoon sunlight faded into soft shades of orange, Ethan wandered inside to wash his hands before dinner. Claire stepped onto the grass beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally I turned toward her. "I cannot change what happened." She nodded quietly. "I know. I cannot give you back the birthdays I missed or the nights you faced alone." Her eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. I took a slow breath. "But if you allow me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure neither of you ever doubts where you belong again." She searched my face for several long seconds, almost as though she was looking for the man she had fallen in love with years earlier. "Adrian," she whispered, "I am not asking you to erase the past." "Then what are you asking?" A gentle smile appeared. "Just do not disappear again." At that exact moment the back door burst open. Ethan ran outside carrying 3 paper plates piled high with warm cookies. "Family dessert," he declared proudly. He handed 1 plate to Claire, 1 to me, and climbed onto the porch swing between us. As the first stars slowly appeared above the quiet neighborhood, Ethan leaned comfortably against my shoulder while pointing toward the darkening sky. "Next time," he said with complete confidence, "we can use the telescope together." For the first time in many years, I realized that the future no longer felt like something I had to conquer. It felt like something I had finally been invited to share. Spring arrived quietly, bringing warm sunlight, blooming flowers, and the kind of ordinary mornings I had spent years believing were impossible for someone like me. My trips between New York and Boston became so frequent that the drive no longer felt long. Ethan began keeping a calendar beside his bed, placing a bright blue star sticker on every weekend we spent together. He insisted on calling them our adventure days. Sometimes we visited museums. Sometimes we built model airplanes at the kitchen table. Sometimes we simply sat in the backyard watching birds gather near the old maple tree. I discovered that the smallest moments often became the ones I treasured most. One Friday afternoon, Claire called while I was finishing a meeting. "Do not forget tomorrow," she reminded me gently. "I would not miss it for anything," I answered. Ethan's elementary school was holding its annual spring performance, and he had practiced his lines for weeks. When Saturday finally arrived, I reached the school auditorium almost an hour early. Parents filled the rows with cameras, flowers, and handmade congratulation signs. The room buzzed with cheerful conversation while children peeked nervously from behind the stage curtain. I found my seat beside Claire near the center aisle. She smiled as I sat down. "He has been looking for you every 5 minutes." I laughed softly. Then I came just in time. The lights dimmed. The curtain slowly opened. Class after class walked onto the brightly decorated stage wearing colorful costumes celebrating the changing seasons. Finally, Ethan's class appeared. He stood in the second row wearing a light blue shirt and holding a cardboard butterfly he had painted himself. His eyes searched the audience until they found us. The nervous expression on his face disappeared instantly. He smiled with complete confidence before delivering every line perfectly. When the applause filled the auditorium, I realized I was clapping harder than anyone around me. After the performance ended, families gathered outside the classrooms for photographs. Ethan came running toward us with his teacher walking just behind him. "Mrs. Parker," he said excitedly, "I want you to meet my family." The teacher smiled warmly before looking at me. "You must be Ethan's father. We have heard so much about you." I glanced toward Claire, who simply nodded with quiet encouragement. Ethan reached for my hand without hesitation. "This is my papa," he announced proudly. "He lives in New York, but he always comes when he promises." Those simple words reached places inside my heart that no success, fortune, or reputation had ever touched. I looked down at the little boy standing beside me, then at the woman who had carried impossible burdens alone because she believed she was protecting us. Slowly, I reached for Claire's hand as well. She squeezed mine gently, not because the past had disappeared, but because we had finally chosen to stop letting it decide our future. Later that afternoon, we walked together through the school playground while Ethan chased bubbles floating across the grass. The sunlight reflected in his bright blue eyes, the same eyes that had first made me question everything I believed 6 years ago. I realized then that families are not built by perfect timing or flawless choices. They are built by truth, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again after life has taken an unexpected turn. As Ethan slipped one hand into mine and the other into Claire's, he looked up with the biggest smile I had ever seen. "Come on," he laughed. "We have so much time to make up for." And for the first time in my life, I understood that the greatest fortune I would ever protect was not an empire. It was the family walking beside me.